He hadn't planned on staying long. In fact, Daniel walked into the cafe that cold November afternoon with the intention of eating quickly, paying his bill, pulling his hood back over his head, and disappearing into the grayness waiting outside. He was tired, running on almost no sleep, and still replaying the phone call that had torn open the last piece of hope he had left. The cafe was simply a place to avoid going back to an empty apartment for a little while longer. But life has a way of placing people exactly where they need to be, especially when they don't recognize the moment forming around them. Before the story continues, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of unexpected moments, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs a reminder of hope, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Daniel slid into a corner seat, the kind tucked near a window where the outside world looked like a watercolor painting. His hoodie was pulled low, his shoulders hunched, and his hands wrapped around a lukewarm paper cup he hadn't even bothered to drink from. Just hours earlier, he had been in a job interview, the 4th one that month, the 20th that year, and once again walked away with the same polite, rehearsed rejection. He used to have a good job, a comfortable life, and a steady sense of direction. But those comforts had vanished over the past year, slipping through his fingers like dust he couldn't gather. A company layoff, a sick father he had cared for until the end, medical bills he could barely understand, and a quiet, unbearable loneliness that settled in when he realized he had been living most of his life with no one truly waiting for him at home. So here he sat, pushing around a sandwich he no longer wanted, trying hard to forget the man he had once been, the man who believed life couldn't collapse so suddenly. It was then that the cafe door opened with a chime, and a burst of cold air swept in, along with a small family. A woman in a winter blue coat stepped inside with 2 children, a boy who looked about 7 with careful, observant eyes, and a little girl with curls bouncing around her face and a pink coat too big for her tiny frame. They looked like a small universe orbiting around the woman, depending on her light to guide them. Daniel noticed them only in fragments at first, the way exhausted people notice things without really seeing them. He glanced up briefly, returned his gaze to the table, and assumed they were simply waiting for their order. But the cafe was crowded, every table filled except for Daniel's corner seat and a few stools near the counter. The mother surveyed the room with a mix of worry and politeness, the kind of expression worn by someone used to navigating the world while protecting the 2 small hands attached to her own. Daniel didn't think much of it until he felt someone standing near him. When he looked up, the mother was there. Her voice was gentle but threaded with urgency, the kind that comes when options are limited. She explained that all the seats were taken, and she didn't want her kids sitting far from her. Then, before she could finish, she asked a question, simple, soft, and completely unexpected. "Would you mind if my kids sit with you for a little while?" In another time, Daniel might have hesitated. He might have worried about saying the wrong thing or creating an awkward situation. But in that moment, he was too tired to overthink, too beaten down to analyze, and too starved for human connection to refuse. He nodded before he could second-guess it. The boy climbed into the seat across from him, sitting straight with polite caution. The girl plopped beside him, swinging her legs like she was tapping out a rhythm only she could hear. Their mother thanked Daniel with a warm, grateful smile before stepping away to place their order. Daniel didn't say anything at first. He wasn't sure what one was supposed to say to children. They'd never met. But the little girl solved that problem for him by pointing at the untouched sandwich on his plate and asking if he didn't like food. He cracked a small smile, his first real one in weeks, and told her he was just tired. The boy nodded solemnly as if he understood something far deeper than his age should allow. As minutes stretched on, Daniel noticed things he hadn't paid attention to in months. The warmth of company, the gift of curiosity, the way children looked at strangers without judgment. The boy told him he liked puzzles and had just lost a tooth. The girl announced that her pink coat had magic buttons, each one able to make someone smile if she pressed it. Daniel wasn't sure if magic buttons existed, but when she tapped one and smiled at him, something inside him softened. Their mother soon returned with a tray full of warm food and steaming cocoa, thanking Daniel again as she set everything down. She didn't sit with them. Instead, she hovered nearby, giving him space while keeping her children in view. It was intentional, respectful, and gentle. Daniel asked her if she wanted to sit too, but she said she didn't want to intrude. Still, the table was small, the cafe was crowded, and eventually she settled into the seat next to her children. Her name was Sarah, and as the minutes turned into an hour, and the hour into 2, Daniel learned pieces of her life through small details. The tired softness in her eyes, the way she counted each coin before paying, the careful way she spoke to her children, as if she wanted every word to uplift them. She worked late nights, she was raising her kids alone, and she was doing everything she could to hold her family together despite the weight resting on her thin shoulders. Daniel didn't tell her much about himself at first. Shame has a way of clinging to a person's throat, making it hard to speak. But Sarah had a way of listening without pressing, without prying, simply allowing him to open up the way one gently opens a fragile envelope. Eventually, he told her about the year he'd survived, losing his father, his job, his direction. He told her how each day felt heavier than the last, and how the world felt indifferent to whether he showed up or not. What surprised him was how she didn't look at him with pity. Instead, she looked at him like someone who understood the cost of invisible battles. The cafe slowly emptied as sunset bled into the sky. Staff members wiped down tables, locked cabinets, and began turning off lights, section by section. The soft hum of closing time drifted around them. By the time Sarah gathered her children's coats and thanked Daniel once more, he felt something shift inside him. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. He felt seen. He felt needed, if only for a moment. He felt human again. Sarah ushered her children toward the door, but the little girl ran back and pushed one of her magic buttons on her coat toward him, insisting it was for good luck tomorrow. Daniel laughed, thanked her, and promised to keep the magic safe. After they left, the cafe felt unbearably quiet. Daniel remained seated, not because he was avoiding leaving, but because he wanted to sit with the warmth still lingering around him. He hadn't realized how cold he had become inside until someone else offered warmth without asking for anything in return. Time passed. Chairs were stacked, lights dimmed. And then the waiter, a young man with tired eyes and a gentle posture, approached Daniel. He told him they were closing and asked softly if he was doing okay. Daniel started to apologize for staying so long, but before he could stand, the waiter removed his apron, pulled out the chair Sarah's daughter had used, and sat down across from him. "You look like someone who needs someone to sit with him for a minute," the waiter said. And Daniel, unexpectedly, felt his chest tighten. Not from embarrassment, not from discomfort, but from something he had nearly forgotten. Kindness. It wasn't pity, it wasn't charity. It was human connection being offered quietly, without expectation. Daniel didn't cry, but his eyes grew hot. He told the waiter, in clipped sentences, that he had just needed a place to rest, that he was fine, that he would be okay. The waiter didn't push. He didn't ask questions. He simply sat there with him for a few minutes while the last of the cafe closed around them. Sometimes company isn't about talking. It's about not being left alone in moments when silence feels too heavy. When Daniel finally stood to leave, he felt lighter. Not healed, not fixed, but steadier. The world outside hadn't changed, but he had. Just enough to see the next step ahead of him. That night, he placed the little girl's imaginary magic button on his kitchen counter and stared at it longer than he expected. For the first time in months, he set an alarm for the next morning with something close to determination. The next day, he applied for 3 more jobs. The day after that, he received a call for an interview he hadn't expected. A week later, he got a part-time position that would help him stay afloat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. And starts, he realized, were more valuable than endings. Over the weeks that followed, he often thought of Sarah and her children, the small family that had unknowingly pulled him back from a ledge he hadn't even admitted he was standing on. He wondered if they remembered him, if the children still talked about the man who let them share his table. Then one snowy afternoon, while Daniel was buying groceries he could finally afford without anxiety, he saw a familiar pink coat in the next aisle. Before he could stop himself, he called out softly. The little girl turned, and her face lit up with recognition. You still have the magic button? She asked, running over. Daniel nodded. Her brother smiled shyly behind her, older somehow, more confident. And then Sarah appeared, pushing a small cart, looking surprised but genuinely happy to see him. They talked for a while, warm words, easy smiles, and Sarah told him she had just been promoted at work. Things were still hard, but getting better. Daniel told her he had started rebuilding his life piece by piece. Before they parted ways, Sarah told him something he never forgot. Sometimes we sit with strangers at the right moment without knowing why. Maybe we don't need to know why. Maybe it's enough that we were there. Daniel went home that night feeling full, not from food, not from success, but from the simple truth that people, even strangers, can hold each other up without realizing it. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel grow, and it reminds more people that kindness still matters. Before we end, tell us in the comments, have you ever had a stranger change your day or your life in a small but unforgettable way?